Hey everyone, this is Rocky from WeLearnChess.com. Today I've got a video on how to play against a really aggressive gambit that white might play against you in king-pawn openings, so e4, e5 openings. Even if you don't play those, it might be interesting for you to look at because some of the patterns can sometimes come up in other games. So I don't know what's going on, but recently I've seen this gambit a lot, like in bullet, 5-minute, 10-minute, and even this was a 15-10 game and somebody played it against me. It's not very good for white. There's only a couple gambits where I actually take the pawn as black. I take the pawn for the King's Gambit because the Fischer defense is so solid, and I take this pawn in this gambit that I'm going to show you today. So let's put it on the board here. So e4, e5, and white goes in for this center game. This isn't a gambit yet because after you take this, white has some different things. He could play this sort of, I think this might be the main line of the center game. And here you can play knight f6 or you can play knight c6. I don't think you really have to look much further than this. This is sort of like a reverse Scandinavian, but it seems kind of silly for white to play in this style because, well, I don't even like the Scandinavian for black, but I can sort of understand the logic a little bit because it's, it's a response to white's opening play. But white here is basically chosen to play this way where he's, moving his queen around. I've seen the queen go here. I've seen it go to d3. I've seen it go all the way back. I guess probably could even go over here. I'm not really sure. But I think e3 is the main move, and then you can just sort of develop as black, and I think it's a pretty even game. But it's just seems kind of weird to give black basically free equality right away. But at almost all these lines, you're going to get equality as black almost immediately, like from move 3 and 4 on. So that's just one example. But okay, here white plays something called the Danish Gambit. So this is where things start to get interesting, and you have a couple options here as black. You can play sort of a more solid conservative way, or you can try to get a little bit crazy where you're going to give white an initiative and then have to try to defend. But if you defend successfully, then you basically win all the games. But easier said than done. You'll see what the board looks like when you play the crazier way, but let me show you the more conservative way first, which is actually probably the best way to play. It's the way that you'll see played in most high-level games. I think it's even the recommended move by Stockfish at the moment, if I'm not mistaken, Stockfish 6, and that's just to play d5. If you want to see some really detailed analysis of this, I'm pretty sure Chess Explained has a video on this in his e4, e5 repertoire series on the center game, so go ahead and check that out. And here, basically, no matter what way plays, you're going to get pretty easy game, and I think the moves they're mostly intuitive except for sort of one line that I'll show you. So what can white do? Well, if he just takes this pawn with the queen, for example, you could actually just take this pawn. He could take it with check, and then you could block, and you can play that even material game. But a lot of what white players are doing, they'll take this queen, they'll take the queen on d8, displace your king, and then try to play for initiative. And you do have to be a little bit careful here, actually. You could even give this pawn back, maybe, if you just make sure that your bases are covered. Whenever these kind of queenless middle games happen, I guess they're called. It's not quite an end game, but a queenless middle game. Both sides always have to watch out for their weak points, because what can happen is knights can easily jump in. They're a couple moves away from getting into forks, and your king sometimes is the only piece that can defend these if you're not careful. And your king can't defend both of these pawns at once, and the white king can't defend both of these, so you have to make sure that you get a bishop covering one of these pawns and your king can defend the other one, so you're not getting forked. So white will have a little bit of an initiative here. I think you probably can hold on to the pawn, just have to be careful how you do it. In any case, at the very least, black is equal here, even if he has to give up the pawn, give the pawn back. So that's fine. So you shouldn't be afraid of that. So I don't know necessarily if white would normally play this. Another interesting point here, and actually the preferred move by the computer, is to play knight f6. And this is kind of funny because the point is white actually can't play e5 here. Usually white can play e5 in these kind of positions that can get really crazy for black. But, black has two good moves here. I mean, you could just play knight c6 and bounce the queen and play that way. But actually the computer prefers to play knight e4. And the interesting point is that you're going to get bishop c5 protected by the knight with a tempo. And this knight is hard to get rid of, at least right away. He can't bump it right away because, well, you're still going to play this bishop c5 move, and then where's the queen going to go? The computer recommends here just accepting the immediate fork. And if you have to accept going down an exchange right out of the opening, that you probably did something wrong as white. So if you try something fancy like, okay, queen check, you can block with the bishop, forcing the queen somewhere else, and then probably only has 2 squares here, so either c2 or d1. I think the computer said that d1 is a little bit better. But now you have this just vicious check here on h4, and this is basically game over. He has to probably block here. I don't think, he can't risk something like this. He's just going to get mated because this king has come out of the center, and without even looking at this is terrible. This is just mate. Yeah, he can't walk with the king, so he's got to play this move here with g3, and then among other things, you can just take this. If he takes here, you can take here. Yeah, he can't even. I don't know what he would do. If he tries to do something like this, maybe you could just take it. Yeah, he's just losing material anyway. Any way that you cut it, and his king's going to be unsafe. So this sort of setup here, where if white were to allow it, then that would be terrible. So he can't play e5, and he can't kick this knight if he does. I think a lot of people will play e5 there, so just know that you can go to e4. But let's say that he realizes that he can't play this push, and then what is he going to do? The computer actually recommends bishop e3, just trying to get rid of a couple pieces because it's actually white that's going to be under pressure here. So what you can do here is still play this bishop c5 move, obviously. And then queen probably will go here just to protect the bishop. If the queen goes anywhere else, actually, we'll see the similar pattern. Like if the queen were to do this now it's really bad because you can take this bishop on e3, and now the check is probably even worse now. So we've seen the king can't walk before, because if the king were to walk here, this is slightly different, I think, here. Yeah, because the bishop's off the board. I was wondering why it was so easy to mate him. Here he can walk here, but you've got this check, and then if he takes here, among other things, you're going to win the queen, but actually he's mated. That's check. There's mate there. And again, even if you didn't find the mate, you win the queen, and game's over that way. So even if you forget the detail that the bishop's off the board, either way he got mated. But basically the idea is that the king can't walk. If the king starts going to the center, just take your time and look for the mate. So he's got to play g3. We've seen this, and we can see that we can take this here because of the pin. And white could try to attack the queen here, but you can just drop it back. And the rook is under attack, first of all. The pawn is still pinned, and now e3 is under attack too. So what is he going to do? Like if he tries to play like rook g1 to attack this knight, but then you have queen takes e3 with check, and he's got to block with the bishop so he doesn't lose heavy material. But you can just drop the knight back here, and now you're threatening mate in 1 if he doesn't do anything. So he has to move the queen actually to give his king some lufts. Then you still play this check on f2. King d1, and then here I think the computer just says to castle. You have a huge attack. White's king is in the center. The pieces are sort of coordinated to the extent where they're holding on by a thread, but it's not going to last very long. You're going to bring your other pieces out. You can set up discoveries on this queen. You can just play knight c6 calmly, or maybe after you play bishop f5, you could take it out to d7 and move it out this way. You're just gonna build up your attack, and white's in a lot of trouble here. I think the evaluation was like over -3 or more or something. So it probably won't happen because I don't think white will get too fancy with these checks. Although maybe he would. But so what white should play is just to drop the queen back here. And in this position, you can drop the bishop back to b6. If he takes it, you're going to open up the a file, which is actually a nice idea because white might really like to castle queenside here, but he's not going to be able to do it very easily if you've got the a file open already. So actually, white shouldn't take that bishop, but some players might do it. And here, I don't know, I guess white could just probably like play knight d2 or something and try to get rid of that annoying knight, but then black can castle, bring his pieces out, and you're talking about even material here where if anything your king's going to be safer. And if it's tough for white to castle long, which it might be in some lines, then it's going to take him a while to get his king safe on the king side. And in the meantime, you might be able to even get a tempo on the queen or something like that and put your pieces in good spots. So again, at the very least, equal or maybe even a slight edge to black in these lines. So that all happened because of this e5 push here, which is just this one line that you want to be aware of. I mean, for the most part, this is a more conservative approach, but there's sort of that one crazy line that could happen. There's also I should say, actually, if he takes with the queen and you were to play this way with the knight, then sometimes you could get similar ends, but actually he could just take here and you could trade, and then you end up in one of those end games. So okay, yeah, so after d5 we looked at what could happen if maybe the queen takes. If pawn takes here, you could just take this pawn here and you could just play this position where you're actually up a pawn. You don't have to try to hold on to this pawn for dear life. You might be able to in some way, but probably better would just be to get your king safe, get developed. If he gets the pawn back, so what? Then you're still ahead in development, and you're at the very least you've equalized again by move 4 here. And the opening is black. You can't really ask for much more than that. So I think that's the only thing that leaves here is pawn takes here, and again I think you could probably get away with knight f6, but you could just take this. And again, if you end up with something like this, then whatever, you could just play this endgame against equal. Kind of boring, but whatever. Here, if he takes with the pawn, I guess is probably more likely. Then this line can get a little bit crazy where stuff like okay, attack the queen, then you pin this, and then there's this whole variation that's like it's almost forced, I think, and I'm pretty sure that the Chess Explained channel video goes over this, so look for that E4, E5 repertoire series in his playlists. Check out the Center Game 1 and he'll go over all this in detail, and there's some funny exchange sack in the middle of the board that happens, and I should probably look at it again myself. So that could happen too, and usually I think you end up in some sort of endgame where, again, black is equal or maybe even slightly better. So really this isn't a great opening for white because you have that d5 option as black. And a lot of times in these king pawn openings, if you can play and an early d5 is black under favorable circumstances, you're doing pretty well. So it's not really too surprising that this is a good move, because anytime there's no knight on c3 protecting the d5 square, a lot of times you can get away with the d5 push and free up your pieces a little bit. So okay, so anyway, those are sort of the calmer lines, and the more conservative way to play it is black. But let's look what happens if you want to get a little bit funky fresh here and you want to take this pawn on c3. So after you take on c3, I'm not really sure why more white players don't do this, but the simple capture on c3 with the knight looks really good to me. I think the computer gives the position as already as equal, even though white's down material, just because you can see that these bishops are open here where, it could be c4, b5, and there's options here for this bishop on this diagonal. The other knight's going to come out pretty easily to f3 or maybe even to e2 in some lines. White king's going to get pretty safe pretty fast, and you look at this sorry lack of developing. Black doesn't even have a pawn out. So this looks actually pretty bad. So if more people start playing knight takes c3 against me, I'll probably stop playing. I'll probably stop taking that pawn, and I'll probably go back to playing d5 like I used to. I just kind of got tired of some of the variations, but now that I've looked at this in more detail, maybe I'll go back to d5. But in any case, if you want to play this, it is kind of fun. And for some reason over the past couple weeks, I don't know if there's some video out there or something in some game, famous gamers up there that I missed, but everybody and their mother seems to be playing bishop c4 here, which is a really aggressive way to play, so gambiting another pawn. And I think it was in a John Bartholomew live chess game video, I don't know, last week, where he was saying, like, usually you don't want to accept the second pawn in a gambit. Like, usually taking the first pawn's okay. If you want to try to refute it, taking the second pawn's usually a bad idea. And I found that, at least in my humble experience, to be very true almost all the time. Even taking one pawn, a lot of times you have to really, like, bunker down and defend like heck just to be able to survive the game. So I don't usually take a second pawn, but this is an exception because now that you've gone in for this variation, and now that white hasn't taken on c3, you pretty much kind of have to take this pawn, because if you don't, at some point he's going to play knight takes c3 anyway, and he's still going to get the same great development with almost the same amount of moves anyway, and you're not going to get the second pawn. So you pretty much have to take this, and when you do, of course, he's going to take back down. The pride and glory of white's position are these bishops on adjacent diagonals, and it looks really menacing and scary for black. And it is, actually. If you if you make a couple missteps, that's it. It's pretty much game over. So you have to defend really precisely. But actually, the defense, I don't think it's actually too hard. I mean, once I studied a little bit, it looked pretty intuitive. So let's go through it here. So in this position here, it's black to move. And you have to sort of ask yourself, okay, well, what is black's plan? He's got no development, so he's got to get developed. He's got no presence in the center, so at some point he's got to get that going. And he's got to get his king safe. And usually in gambits, you really want to try to get your king safe as fast as possible, because if the attacking player can catch your king in the center, then he's pretty much always got sufficient compensation for the pawn or two. So knowing that getting your king safe is one of the main plans, and maybe the most urgent plan, it makes sense here to play this check on b4, because you're getting a gain of time. So if you were to play knight f6 first, and he was to hit with e5, which is almost surely going to come in a lot of variations, then it's hard for you because you haven't gotten your bishop out yet, and you're not one move away from castling. So get this bishop out first, and then you will be able to play knight f6 and hopefully castle before you get under a huge attack. So here, actually, the computer says the best move is king f1. If that happens to you, you can just do the same thing, like some of the same moves we're going to see in the other variations. You hear my dog in the background. We'll go through the other variations. I'm not going to go too deep here because it's going to be the same moves where we'll see like knight f6 and d5. But in this case, the white king is just unsafe, so I don't really see why it's that much better than the game. But maybe it's just because some of the variations are so forced. But after this check, I think most people playing this, you'll play knight c3. This is sort of the second best move. And here you can play knight f6. So again, going for this goal of trying to castle as quickly as possible. So now white has to, think about something to do here, because you are, I don't want to say threatening, but you are sort of looking to castle here and potentially start your development. Maybe even giving a pawn back in the center with d5. Sometimes you can do that. And just like opening up your pieces, and then you'd only have one pawn, but then your king's safe and opponents probably wouldn't be. So white has to do something, and I think a lot of players are tempted by this e5 move here. And in a lot of times when white has this e pawn ready to roll, it's open, not opposed by any pawn, and there's no pawn on d6 to stop it, and there's a piece on f6 that it can attack. It's often a really good move. A lot of times there's a knight on f6 or even a queen. It could be in Scotch Gambit, Evans Gambit, and Gioco Piano, and some lines you'll see these kind of patterns. But this line here actually isn't as good for white as you think. So let's see what happens, because this is probably the most critical test here. In all those games that I just mentioned, and including this one, you almost always want to be able to respond to this e5 push with d5. Of course, if d5 is attacking the bishop. If it's not attacking anything, then you're just going to lose a piece. So now at least we both have a piece on pre, and white's got to sort of decide what to do. Well, if he takes here, which a lot of people do, and I think it is the main move actually, this is where you have to be really careful. If you were to just take this bishop back, actually you'd be in a lot of trouble, because either before or after a queen trade, white's going to be able to probably take on g7, and then you're going to have to play rook g8, and especially if the queens don't come off, then you're a really long way away from castling queenside, and you could be in a lot of trouble. So what you have to remember in this position is that after he takes your knight, you got to be brave and not take back the bishop. You got to take on f6 with your queen. And here you have a double attack, because not only are you attacking this bishop, but you also have two pieces on c3. You're sort of getting x-rayed by this bishop, but at the moment this knight's pinned, and the bishop's also unguarded, so you'd have to make a couple moves, or maybe one move with queen c2, but it's a little too slow for white to save all his material. So here he's already sort of in trouble. If he wants to try to save his piece, it's going to be hard for him. Like if he just were to move the bishop somewhere, he could just take on c3, and he's in a lot of trouble. Obviously if queen blocks, you take the rook. If the king walks, then the king walks, and you castle next move, and then you get an attack. So he can't really just move the bishop. So what a lot of players will do is they'll play this check here, so that after you block, his bishop's still under attack and you're going to take it, but his point is that you're going to have to destroy your pawn structure to do it. Here, probably he would have to play knight e2 because of that pressure on c3, and then you can take this, and you can play the game from here, where maybe maybe castles, and then you can see what happens. White's a little bit ahead in development. At some point after he plays like, queen somewhere to protect this bishop or rook b1, you're going to have to be careful about discoveries. But let's just really quick. So castles, and then maybe, let's just say he played like rook here. A decent square for your queen is here, just to kind of keep an eye on this this piece here. If we were to play like something like this, I guess he could try h3 to deflect, but at the same time, it's not like he's really threatening you right now with anything. You just have to be careful about discoveries here. So next thing you want to do is try to get your pieces out as quickly as you can into good squares. But that's the name of the game with a lot of these lines as black, where you do have to get your development underway. That's probably one of the best things that white could do, is to sort of destroy this pawn structure so that your extra pawns aren't quite as aggressive. But to be honest, if that's the best that white can do after giving up the pawns, it's not too bad. When I say the best, I mean that's the best in this line if he plays e5, because I don't know if e5 is necessarily the best move. But okay, so white, sort of having seen this before, probably because he's played this, he might not take on f6 right away. Knowing that pressure on c3 is going to come, knowing that his bishop's under attack, knowing that he doesn't really get an attack in that line, he's probably not going to want to play that as much. So what some people have played against me is this queen check. So okay, attacking the bishop, this is still on pre. We've got a lot of crazy stuff going on here, and I don't quite have this pressure on c3 yet. Okay, so you have to block this check with the knight, obviously, protecting your bishop. And here, I mean, a lot of things could happen. A funky move that's shown by the computer, it's actually supposedly the best move, is long castle, I'm sorry, with, some different ideas here. So let's just say as black, I'm sorry, what are you going to do here? Well, you can't take this bishop right now because it's pinned to the queen. And, our knight's under attack here, so we have to be a little bit careful. The more precise move, I think, here is to actually take first on c3. Because if you don't do this first, then in some lines, when this knight isn't able to move, or it gets attacked by like the bishop and the queen, sometimes this bishop can actually be hanging, like remove the defender kind of tactic. So if you take on c3 first here, then it avoids that tactic. And here, this is a little bit tricky. In some lines, you can play knight e4 to attack this bishop, but actually that might be a little bit tricky here, because after bishop takes on d5, that looks really, really unpleasant. So I think probably more precise here is to play the knight back, just get it out under attack, and you have this idea of playing the knight over to b6. So if, for example, bishop here, then, well, actually, that's best. Maybe taking here is a little bit more aggressive. Just because now this, this x-ray is available. And actually supposed to play, I should play queen e7 first. I want to get out of the way of that rook before you do anything. If he tries to take here now and do something like this, I don't really see why you couldn't play just rook b8 here. Yeah, he's probably not going to take here right away. Probably he would just develop. But then I'm going to play here. Oh, here is the line I was thinking about with the rook sack, So here you can just take it. And you're just up and exchanging a pawn here in this endgame, so there's really nothing to sneeze about. The other line, of course, you could just play rook b8, so that wouldn't even get played against you, I don't think. And there are some lines where I'm losing my way here. I've looked at so many variations. Where sometimes if you end up in a position where c6 is getting attacked twice, and you have to allow the capture on the a8 square, you just want to make sure usually that you do it with the king. Let me see if I can find this line. It's not one white castles long. I think it's usually, okay, I remembered it now. So actually, if it's back in this opening position after you play knight f6 and we get into this sort of variation that we saw right from the beginning, if we get this main variation where he takes first and he tries to do this check thing now, and you block just like before, and he plays bishop here, so this actually could happen because White sees that he's going to get this sort of fork on c6 and take your rook. So he might be thinking like, okay, if black takes my rook, okay, well, he's not going to go here with the king because then you take with check. So he's going to make you take without check at least, and he's going to go here. But the problem now is that the king is on this light square diagonal, and we're going to see why that matters in a second. So after white responds, and he's going to pick up your rook, now you have this move that you have to remember here, which is king e7. And this rook is immune due to this discovered check on the queen. And now you're just up huge material. And the only two pieces that white has left can't even play in the game because the knight's pinned to the rook. So this actually doesn't work for white, but they might not calculate far enough to see, and they might not see this king e7 resource. They might just see that after takes here that you might try to do this, and then that would actually, not be great for you. But if you remember that you can do this just because this king is on this light square diagonal, that's actually good. And that's a reason you want to leave it there. You don't want to start chasing around the queen, because the queen on a1 is actually doing a couple important things. One is it's preventing the king from ever coming back there. Two, it's pinning this knight here. And if you start moving the queen around, then you might bump the king off this light square diagonal, and then you won't have that king e7 resource. So that's just one funky line that came up in my head. And actually, I think it's come up in one of my games. I don't know if I played it right during the game, but I will next time. So that was actually more in the main line. I got a little bit off track there. But anyway, the point is that this queen check, no matter when it happens, basically you can meet it with knight c6 just to protect your bishop. No matter what happens here in all these lines, like even if he plays this funky castling line, you're still fine here. So just remember to take on c3 first so that your bishop's not hanging. And then after that, probably most accurate would be to play knight d7 here. Just get your knight out from under attack. And if, for example, he tries to build up some pressure here, make sure you play queen e7 first. And the point is that at least you're not in this x-ray now. And there's not really much the white can do here. I mean, he should develop, to be honest. And if he does that, then you can play knight b6. And if he tries to do this sort of combination here, you can actually play the bishop out because this knight has your rook. So not only was it forking the two important pieces here and forcing simplification into a winning endgame, you've also got yourself covered. He might try the sacrifice here, like I said, but then you just end up into a winning endgame up and exchanging up a pawn. So there's a lot of other variations like that, but you do have to remember a couple moves in these crazy variations, and one is actually to bring your knight back to d7 here. There are some variations where you can stick the knight on e4 because you get a tempo on this bishop, but I think this is safer. Even if you have to give back a pawn, again, you're going to survive. And look at white's king. I mean, if you get your king safe and white's king's hanging out here just in the middle of the open, and especially if you get one of the bishops off the board, he actually might be in more trouble than you. So you do have to be careful. Like if he doesn't go in for these variations where I showed you, they're not that very good for white, and he does something else, which is quite possible. Like after this, well, here you're basically forcing some action, so that'll probably happen. But if he does something else, like he tries to do this here, like I said, you can just play rook b8. And if he tries to do something where he sees that the fork's coming on b6 with this knight, and he just voluntarily moves his bishop back, which some people will do because they just really like having these two bishops, because that's the whole sort of point of the opening. Then you got a free move and you can just castle. And he does have some protection around his king with these bishops, so it's not exactly easy necessarily to get one of them off the board. But that's always one of my goals. Like if I was able to castle here, and now maybe he develops, or maybe he pushes first before he develops, but he's using up tempi. So well, actually here this would probably be bad just in view of this move, because you're going to get one of his bishops off the board. So maybe something. Actually, that's even worse, because that comes with check. And if he's just to take it here, then again we're just forcing simplifications here. So, and once you get one of his bishops off the board, it's a lot easier to defend and get into that winning endgame. So those are some variations with castling long there. But even if he doesn't castle long, if we just go back here, so we get this e5 push, we play with d5. If he tries to check now and he doesn't castle long, Like, what else could he do? Maybe he could play knight e2, just like, you know, trying to mitigate this pressure here on c3. Here, well, his bishop's still under attack, so I wonder if we could even just take it in this position. There are even variations where the computer just lets the knight get taken on f6 and doesn't even take it back. Like, just accepts being down a piece, but for 3 pawns. I forget exactly when that's best, but you don't have to play that way necessarily, because it's easy to mess that up. I think it's better to just you know, make sure you get your piece and just be up the 2 pawns and get your king safe, and then from there you can, you know, you should have a fairly easy time defending and getting into the endgame. But you do have to be careful. There's a lot of tricks, especially when you got these bishops fired at you. There's a lot of potential like discoveries and tactics and things. So you do have to keep your wits about you. But that's even, you know, a lot of your opponents might not even play this check. But I just wanted to show that because it is common. But again, just to really quickly review here. After you take these pawns, you have to play this check. Then you play knight f6, and after e5, you respond with d5, and the main line is going to be this. Where you're still in a really good position, and here he'll probably just play knight e2 so that you don't get this attack on the c3 square. You can take that bishop, and then, you know, you're both going to castle, and you can play this game from here, and you're still, you know, in a great position with black. So that's that. I hope that you enjoyed that video, and there's definitely other crazy lines. There's lines with, you know, the light square bishop taking on f7 if you play your knight to e4 too quickly in some of these lines. So try not to get fancy. Try to stick to this just mainline defense, because if you try to like move your knight around to e4, then already he's got stuff like here, which still might not even be that terrible for you, I guess, but I don't know. This probably, I don't think I would want to play this as black. Not when you have the option of doing so much better, where your king doesn't have to walk around in the center and things like that. So just be careful about tricks like that. But okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and you know, if you are daring and you want to play against this Danish Gambit in the fun way a couple times and see how you do, you know, your opponent's probably going to think as soon as you do this that he's already won the game, and he's probably salivating at the attack. But you've seen in some lines where actually you're just going to get some pretty short simplifications, and he can even get in a lot of trouble in some lines. So good luck and have fun in your games.